Hey there, vinyl community. It's Joe coming at you from Planet 13, and this is my contest entry to Steve Carlson's 1,000 subscribers. So, like a lot of you, I watch Steve every Sunday morning, and I consider it like getting a PhD in music. And what I love about Steve's channel is, okay, so we're all part of the vinyl community, and what I think Steve reflects most in his videos and his actions on YouTube is that he understands that vinyl part of the vinyl community is just not important. At the end of the day, it's just stuff, right? It's stuff we listen to, and of course we adore it, and we'll appreciate it in 20 years, but it's just stuff. Steve is always more focused on the community part and the relationship part of YouTube. And that's just what I love about Steve. This comes across in his videos at the start. He sums up what he's done at the start of his week or during his week, he'll show what he was been up to. And that's probably my favorite part. Although I do love listening to Steve talk about the music. And then, he injects a lot of humor. And when he does talk about the music, it's not about the actual songs, really. He does play the songs in the background in some instances, but he talks about the making behind the album, where the band's heads were at. He throws out some interesting facts, just real cool stuff that you don't see everywhere else. And of course, he talks about his memories about the album, and his album tastes are really diverse. You'll get something different every week and in every episode. And he also goes above and beyond with his commenting. Every time you reply or comment on his videos, you get a very genuine reply from Steve, a very warm, welcoming reply. And if you put out a video, you're bound to have Steve comment on it, and he always finds the perfect thing to say. And this takes a lot of work, and I know Steve just enjoys it because the community part is important to him, and that's just what I love about Steve. But enough about Steve. Let's get on with his contest because I don't want to run long because I know Steve is a very busy guy and he doesn't want to watch a half-hour video. So Steve's video was about your top 5 go-to albums. And my top go-to albums aren't albums I would recommend to anyone. All these albums you'll probably, for the most part, recognize, maybe not, but they were all commercially successful albums in one sense or another. They all had like videos. They're all marketed well, but they're not albums I'd recommend. They're just albums that came out at that perfect time for me, where I was the right age and I was in the right mood, and they've just stuck with me. And they're albums I always listen to from start to finish without ever hitting skip. And they're go-to albums because they're albums I'd put in the car and they'll remain in the car CD player for a month or two. They're just not coming out because they kind of mellow me out when I'm driving. I'm not all road ragey. I'm just happy. And again, they're not top 5 albums. I think top 5s are things I would recommend to people because they're a little more mainstream. These are not mainstream. Well, they might be, but they're not albums that anyone's really talking about or coveting on vinyl. They're not things people are really seeking out or you see in the vinyl community. And they're all albums I have on CD. They're not anything I really don't want on vinyl, although I wouldn't mind getting them eventually. So the first album I have is a double album, and it's Guns N' Roses' Use Your Illusions 1 and 2. So this is a very bloated masterpiece that no one really ever talks about. Everyone loves Appetite for Destruction, which is kind of like a punky bar rock masterpiece. Here we have a fragmented band where one member wants to be like Elton John or Freddie Mercury, and the rest of the band want to be the Rolling Stones. And Axl, he was just insane during this period, and the rest of the band, they were all doped out or drunk, and how they put this together, I don't know, because it should have flopped, but you get some really dysfunctional songs on here, and you get some really rockin' songs on here, and you get a cross between the two on here, and I just love it. This is an album, again, it just mellows me out. Of course, I love the hits when they came out. This was super promoted on, MTV and Much Music. November Rain was huge. Don't Cry was huge. Estranged was huge. You Could Be Mine. The Garden was cool. And then it's the other songs that weren't promoted that are my favorites because, you get your fill of those hits and then you start listening to the other songs and you just realize they're just better. Maybe because you haven't heard them as much. But yeah, really cool album. Again, I don't recommend it, but me, I love it. Next up is an album you probably don't recognize, but this is Danzig Volume 4. It doesn't really have the cover art because it came in a cardboard slipcase, and because I throw this in my car all the time, I don't want the cardboard attached to it, and I just can't dig it up at the moment. So about this album, it's kind of like a blues industrial with Danzig's belting vocals. If you've heard the song Mother, you know Danzig just kind of belts out vocals. And this is what he kind of does on this. There are some mellow tracks. He can sound like Jim Morrison on a lot of songs, or like Elvis in a few. I won't go too deep with this. I just don't think Danzig gets a lot of credit. I think a lot of that has to do with he's made a lot of meat-headed comments in the press. But this is a talented guy. His first band was the Misfits, and the Misfits, I think they actually have a concert tonight. It's their last concert. They broke up in the early 80s. They were a punk band that sang about horror music, and they're very influential towards a lot of bands like Metallica. And they're still, if you walk down the street in any downtown city, you'll see tons of kids wearing Misfits shirts. Skaters love Misfits. I don't think skaters are a thing as much anymore, but that kind of skater kid. I love the Misfits. A lot of people love the Misfits. A lot of people love Danzig. And he kind of writes very Doors lyrics, but it's kind of like a metal, bluesy, rockin' album. And he's just an amazing lyricist. He's written songs for Roy Orbison and Johnny Cash as well, which they performed. And that's all I really got to say about this. And after they released this, of course, the main band he had broke up and he went on to do different things. But I think this was his last greatest album for me. Again, not an album I'd recommend. Number 3, we got White Zombies, Astro Creep 2000. This is just kind of like again, an album I wouldn't recommend. There's a huge hit on here called More Human Than Human. But this is an album I listened to from start to finish. It's, if you know Rob Zombie, he says yeah a lot. And so every other lyric on here is probably yeah. But we also get his band at the time. So this is before he went solo. They were very kind of groove oriented. Kind of like Pantera, I guess. You know how Pantera had that groove. White Zombie had that groove as well. Just a kaleidoscope of guitar riffs and horror movie lyrics. And I think it was just awesome stuff. I love this album. I meet a lot of people who do love this album, but no one really ever talks about it. Next album up is Faith No More's Angel Dust. So before this, Faith No More had a huge hit called Epic. It was kind of like a rock rap kind of album and hit song. And after that success, they were like, we don't really want to be famous. We don't like this. So they released this album, which is sold a lot of copies due to the success of the album before it and the marketing push they had behind this. But no one really liked it when it came out. Like, all my friends had it, and we all like, yeah, we like it, but we just don't get it. And after a while, we all kept just kind of listening to it, and eventually we all kind of got it after a while. So it's a very caustic album, and by that I mean, like, it's not easy to digest. It switches a lot. There's a lot going on here. The guitarist, Jim Martin, he left after this. He's like, I don't like what I'm doing anymore. So he left. And after this, they put out a couple more albums, and then they broke up, but they're back together, and they're putting out new music, which is still pretty cool. Final album I got is Radiohead. So this is probably the most likeliest album I'd recommend. This is kind of like Oasis, I guess, when Radiohead was still kind of accessible. Even though Radiohead kind of became more inaccessible, their fandom grew huge. Like, this is when they were still doing bars or concert halls. And after this, they just exploded because they went in a completely artsy, esoteric direction. This is more straight up rock and roll, and I love it. I think this is a fantastic album. It screams 90s. You got Just was a huge song. Street Spirit was a huge song. Nice Dreams was big. Fake Plastic Trees, it was covered by Alanis Morissette even. High and Dry, The Bends. I just love every song on here. I listen to it start to finish. It's a go-to album. I'm going to end it there. I've gone on 10 minutes. Until next time, cheers.